In this course, you will review scientific method, organisms classification, the cell, its structure, movement, energy and division, and genetics. So, use this class to check yourself and to improve these basic concepts. The scientific method is an organized way that helps scientists or anyone to answer a question or begin to solve a problem. As scientists study the natural world, they ask questions about what they observe. To find the answers to these questions, they use certain skills or methods. The figure shows a sequence of the skills that a scientist might use in an investigation. Scientists practice scientific inquiry, a process that uses a variety of skills and tools to answer questions or to test ideas about the natural world. In the scientific method, there are different steps. The first is ask questions, make observation, state a problem, gather information, and infer. In the step of hypothesis, you have to predict. After that, test the hypothesis. Design an experiment, make a model, gather and evaluate evidence, collect data, and record observations. In the step of analyze results, you can graph results, classify information, make calculations, and after that, you have to draw conclusions. Hypothesis supported and hypothesis not supported. Classifying organisms. In the taxonomic classification, from the bottom to the top, we can see how similar species are grouped into one genus. Similar genera are grouped into families. Similar families are grouped into orders. Similar orders are grouped into classes. Similar classes are grouped into phyla. Similar phyla are grouped into kingdoms, and similar kingdoms are grouped into domains. There are three domains: bacteria, archaea, eukarya. In this example, we are going to note the taxonomic classification of the American black bear. He belongs to the domain Eukarya, kingdom Animalia, phylum Chordata. It is related with the vertebrate animals. There are 5 classes in the phylum Chordata: mammals, birds, reptiles, amphibians, and fish. But our animal is a bear, he is a mammal. The order is Carnivora. A carnivore is an animal that eats other animals, although the species classified in this order are basically meat eaters. A substantial number of them, especially among bears and members of the raccoon family, also feed extensively in vegetation and are thus actually omnivorous. But the bear belongs to this order. Bears are mammals of the family Orsidae. This family has 8 species of omnivorous bears that have large claws and teeth, small eyes and ears, short tails, and long, rough fur. The genus of this bear is Ursus, which includes 4 species of bear: the brown bear, the polar bear, and the 2 species of black bear. A genus is a group of similar species. The bear in the example is the American black bear. Its scientific name is Ursus americanus. This is the species. A species is a group of organisms that have similar traits and are able to produce fertile offspring. There are 3 domains: archaea, bacteria, and eukarya. The bacteria and archaea domain are organisms with prokaryotic cells, and the eukarya domain is related to eukaryotic cells. So prokaryotic are bacteria and archaea. The bacteria are also known as true bacteria. They are microscopic prokaryotic cells. They are cells that have no nucleus or organelles enclosed within membranes. The archaea, most are microbes that live in extreme environments and also are called extremophiles. Some species live in ordinary temperatures and salinities. Some even live in your guts. And the eukarya, are organisms that have cells that contain a nucleus. This domain contains four kingdoms: Protista, fungi, plantae, and animalia. We are going to know some difference between prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells. Prokaryotic are small and unicellular, non-nucleus and circular DNA floating in the cytoplasm. The eukaryotic are larger, multi or unicellular, nucleus, linear DNA surrounded by the nucleus. Similar kingdoms are grouped into domains. In the three domains we can find kingdoms, so in bacteria we can find the kingdom Bacteria. In archaea we can find the kingdom Archaeabacteria. In eukarya we can find the kingdoms Protista, fungi, plantae, and animalia. In the kingdom Archaeabacteria, simple unicellular organisms live in extreme environments. Examples: the thermophiles are heat lovers, and the halophiles are salt lovers. In the bacteria kingdom are simple unicellular organisms that can live in almost all the environments. Some examples are the bacillus, that have a rod shape, or the coccus, that have spherical shape, and the spirillum, that have spiral shape. In the Protista kingdom, most are unicellular and are more complex than bacteria and archaea. Some are harmful for humans. The best example is the amoeba. In the kingdom fungi are unicellular or multicellular. They absorb food, and some examples are the mold of the bread and the mushrooms that we can eat. In the kingdom Plantae are multicellular organisms. They make their own food, photosynthesis. Some examples are moss and the sunflower. In the kingdom Animalia are multicellular. They eat other organisms. They are consumers. Some examples are the spider and the mammals. In the chart, we can see the summary of the characteristics of each domain and each kingdom. In the domain Bacteria, the kingdom Eubacteria or bacteria, the cell type is prokaryote. The number of cells is unicellular, and the examples are the Streptococcus and the Escherichia coli. In the domain Archaea, the kingdom Archaeabacteria, the cell type is prokaryote. The number of cells is unicellular, and the examples are methanogens and allophiles. And the eukarya domain, we can find the kingdom Protista, that have a cell type eukaryote. The number of cells is most are unicellular, some are colonial, and some are multicellular. The examples are the amoeba, the paramecium, the slime molds, and the giant kelp. And in the fungi kingdom, the cell type is eukaryote. The number of cells is most are multicellular and some are unicellular. The examples are the mushrooms and the yeast. In the kingdom Plantae, the cell type is eukaryote. The number of cells is multicellular. The examples are the mosses, the ferns, and the flowering plants. And in the Animalia kingdom, the cell type is eukaryotic. The number of cells is multicellular, and the examples are the sponges, the worms, the insects, the fishes, and the mammals. Linnaeus decided that all species names should be in Latin and should have two parts. This two-part system is called binomial nomenclature. The system gives each organism two word scientific name, using the species and the genus. The species is the group of organisms that have similar traits and are able to produce fertile offspring. The genus, group of similar species. In the example, the scientific names of the genus is Drosophila and the species Melanogaster is the fruit fly. And the binomial nomenclature says that is Drosophila melanogaster. Classification tools. Dichotomous keys is a series of descriptions arranged in pairs that leads the user to the identification of an unknown organism. In this diagram, we can see an example of dichotomous key. It is related to fish species. As you can see, it shows different descriptions of some fish. It is the way that we must follow to find the species that we want to know. You keep making choices until you reach the name of the organism. Cladograms is a branch diagram that shows the relationships among organisms, including common ancestors. The cladogram has a series of branches. Each branch follows a new characteristic. Each characteristic can be seen in the species to its right. See what this cladogram tells you about the relationship among the living things that are shown. The salamander, lizard, hamster, and chimpanzee have lungs. The salmon does not have lungs. Therefore, the other animals are more closely related to each other than they are to the salmon. Now we are going to talk about cell structure. The observations made by different scientists in the past, shown in the table, became known as the cell theory. The cell theory has three principles. They are: first one, living things are made of one or more cells, like the tree. Second one, the cell is the smallest unit of life. Because the cell forms tissue, the tissue forms organs, and the organs form the body. And the third and last one is the new cells come from pre-existing cells. We can see the cellular division. Macromolecules are large molecules formed by joining many small molecules. All cells contain other substance besides water that helps cells to do what they do. There are four types of macromolecules in cells. There are nucleic acids, proteins, lipids, and carbohydrates. Each type of macromolecule has its own function in a cell. Nucleic acid is a macromolecule formed when a long chain of nucleotides join together. A nucleotide consists of a nitrogenous base plus a molecule of sugar and one of phosphoric acid. An example of nucleic acid is DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid. The function is the DNA contains the genetic information of the organisms. Proteins. Proteins are long chains of amino acid molecules. Amino acids are building blocks for proteins that are part of every cell, tissue, and organ in your body. There are 20 amino acids. The functions of the proteins are, first of all, communication. Second, transport, such as the hemoglobin that transport oxygen in the blood. Third, chemical breakdown of substances. And fourth, structural support, such as the keratin of protein in the hair. Lipids. Lipids are large macromolecules that does not dissolve in water. The functions are energy storage and protective membranes. The cholesterol is an example of a lipid. Carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are one or more sugar molecules. The functions are energy storage and structural support. The example is the glucose, the photosynthesis product. In this slide, we can see a summary of the macromolecules, their elements, examples, and respective functions. We are going to know the functions of each organelle in the cell. The nucleus. Its function is genetic information, assembly the ribosome subunits, and structural support. The ribosomes. The function is protein synthesis. The endomembrane system, rough endoplasmic reticulum. The function is protein synthesis and processing. The smooth endoplasmic reticulum is lipid synthesis, and the lysosomes is digestion and recycling. Other organelles with their functions are vacuoles, varies coloration, storage of oils, carbohydrates, waters, or toxins, mitochondria, ATP production, energy production, the chloroplasts, production of ATP and sugars via photosynthesis, cytoskeleton, structural support, movement of materials, in some species movement of whole cell, plasma membrane, selective permeability, maintains intracellular environment, and the cell wall, protection and structural support. Remember, the animal cell doesn't have chloroplast and cell wall, but the plant cell has. Moving cellular material. A cell's membrane is selectively permeable, which allows some things to enter or leave the cell, while keeping other things outside or inside the cell. How materials move through the membrane depends on the size of the molecules or particles. There are some ways materials can move in cells: by means of passive transport, active transport, endocytosis, and exocytosis. Passive transport is movement of substance through a cell membrane from areas of higher concentration to areas of lower concentration. It does not use cell's energy. In this passive transport, we have diffusion, that is movement of any substance, and osmosis, that is movement of water. Inactive transport is the movement of substance through a cell membrane from areas of lower concentration to areas of higher concentrations, and it uses cell's energy. The endocytosis and exocytosis is types of vesicle transport. The endocytosis is process during which a cell takes in a substance by surrounding it with a cell membrane, example the proteins. The exocytosis is process during which a cell's vesicles release their contents outside the cells, example wastes. Cells and energy. The cellular respiration is a chemical reaction that converts the energy in food molecules into a usable form of energy called ATP. The glycolysis is a stage of the cellular respiration. The glucose, it's a sugar carbohydrate, is broken down in smaller molecules, pyruvic acid, and produces ATP, the energy molecule. It occurs in the cytoplasm. Fermentation is a reaction to obtain energy from food when oxygen levels are low. It occurs in the cytoplasm. There are two types, and the two are based in pyruvic acid. The first one is alcoholic fermentations. It occurs in yeast, by fungus and bacteria. The second one is lactic acid fermentation. It occurs in animals' muscle tissue. When your muscle uses up oxygen faster than it can be replaced, fermentation happens and produces lactic acid, which causes pain in your muscles. We can see how in muscle cells the glucose by lactic acid fermentation produces ATP energy and lactic acid, and in yeast cells glucose by alcohol fermentation produces ATP energy plus carbon dioxide and alcohol. Cell division. Most cells in an organism go through a cycle of growth, development, and division called the cell cycle. The cell cycle makes it possible for organisms to grow and develop, to replace cells that are old or damaged, and to produce new cells. There are two main phases in the cell cycle. These phases are interphase and the meiotic phase. During interphase, occur replication or copying of DNA, the genetic information. We can see a pair of homologous chromosomes, and after the replication, we can see two pairs of homologous chromosomes with their sister chromatids. The mitosis is a method of cell division in which a cell divides and produces identical copies. It occurs in the somatic cells, cells of the body of an organism, not reproductive cells. The phases of mitosis are prophase, metaphase, anaphase, and telophase. Phases of the mitosis. The first one is prophase, where copied DNA condenses into chromosomes. The nucleolus disappears and the nuclear membrane breaks down. Spindle fibers begin to form. The second is the metaphase, where chromosomes line up in single file at the middle of the cell. The third one is anaphase. Sister chromatids separate. Spindle fibers begin to shorten, pulling chromatids toward opposite sides of the cell. The cell begins to lengthen. And fourth, telophase, a nuclear membrane forms around the chromatin. Chromosomes begin to unwind. Spindle fibers begin to break down. Two identical nuclei forms two diploid cells. Diploid is related to two sets of chromosomes. Meiosis is the form of cell division that creates gametes of sex cells, eggs, or sperm. The phases are prophase 1 and 2, metaphase 1 and 2, anaphase 1 and 2, and telophase 1 and 2. The result of the meiosis is one diploid cell divides and makes 4 haploid cells, one chromosome for each pair, one set of chromosomes. This is a chart to compare the mitosis and the meiosis. In the meiosis, the number of chromosomes in parent cells is diploid. The type of parent cell is reproductive. The number of divisions of nucleus is 2. The number of daughter cells produced is 4. The chromosome number in daughter cells is haploid, and the function is forms sperm and egg cell. In the mitosis and cells division, the number of chromosomes in parent cell is diploid, the type of parent cell is body, the number of division of nucleus is 1, number of daughter cells produced is 2, the chromosome number in daughter cell is diploid, and the function is growth, cell repair, and some kinds of reproduction. Now we are going to talk about genetics. Gregor Mendel, an Australian monk, performed experiments that help answer many questions about heredity. Mendel's research into the question of heredity gave scientists a basic understanding of genetics. After analyzing the results of his experiments, Mendel concluded that 2 factors control each inherited trait. He also proposed that when organisms reproduce, the sperm and the egg each contribute 1 factor for each trait. Mendel hypothesized that some factors were dominants, blocking other factors. A genetic factor that blocks another genetic factor is called a dominant trait. A genetic factor that is blocked by the presence of a dominant factor is called a recessive trait. Dominant means it is the strongest trait. It will mask or cover up the weaker trait. Example, brown hair. Recessive means it is the weaker trait. Example, blonde hair. Dominant alleles are represented by capital letters A, B, C, and recessive alleles are represented by lowercase letters A, B, and C. Punnett square. It is a model used to predict possible genotypes and phenotypes of offspring. Genotype is genes, alleles, and phenotype, physical characteristics.